Think about someone you know who never makes a big deal out of their birthday. Maybe it's a coworker who mentions it in passing, almost like an afterthought, or a friend who actively tells people not to plan anything. Most of us assume this means they don't care, or maybe they're just a private person. But if you actually sit down and study the psychology behind this behavior, you find something much deeper than simple preference. There are real mechanisms in the brain and in personal history that explain why some people treat their birthday like just another square on the calendar. To understand this, you first have to understand what a birthday actually does to the mind. Psychologists call dates like this temporal landmarks. A temporal landmark is any point in time that the brain uses to measure progress, similar to New Year's Day or the start of a new month. These dates trigger something known as the fresh start effect, where a person naturally pauses and reflects on where their life is compared to where they expected it to be. For most people, this reflection feels exciting, but for others, it feels like an audit. Imagine someone turning 30 while still figuring out their career or going through a breakup right around their birthday. For them, the date doesn't feel like a celebration, it feels like a deadline reminding them of everything that hasn't happened yet. Ignoring the day becomes a way of avoiding that uncomfortable comparison. This links directly to something called social comparison theory. Birthdays today are not just personal, they're public performances. Social media turns a private date into a visible event, complete with posts, photos, and public well wishes. For someone who feels uncertain about their life, this spotlight can feel less like love and more like pressure. Picture someone who just lost their job or is going through financial stress. The last thing they want is 20 notifications asking how their special day was. So instead of explaining their situation, they simply downplay the day altogether. It is not that they reject celebration, it is that they reject being watched while they're not feeling their best. Now, here is where the psychology becomes more personal, because a lot of this behavior is actually learned in childhood. Picture a child growing up in a household where money was tight or where parents were distracted by their own stress. The birthday might get a quick cake from a grocery store, no candles, no real attention. Maybe one year it gets forgotten entirely. As small as that sounds, it teaches the brain a long-term lesson. My day is not actually that important to people. That belief doesn't just stay in childhood, it follows a person into adulthood and becomes an emotional default. As grown adults, these people often protect themselves in advance by expecting nothing. If you don't expect a celebration, you can't be hurt when one doesn't happen. This is a defense mechanism closely tied to what psychologists call an avoidant attachment style, where someone manages the risk of disappointment by lowering expectations before anyone else has the chance to let them down. But not everyone who ignores their birthday is dealing with old wounds. There's a second, much healthier version of this same behavior. Some people simply don't tie their self-worth to outside validation. This is what psychologists describe as having an internal locus of evaluation, meaning their sense of value comes from their own standards and accomplishments rather than how loudly people celebrate them. Think of a successful entrepreneur who works through their birthday because they're deep into a project they care about. They're not avoiding joy, they're just finding it somewhere else. To them, getting 100 birthday messages on social media doesn't feel as meaningful as making real progress on something they built themselves. This isn't sadness, it's emotional independence, and research on self-determination theory backs this up. People who are intrinsically motivated tend to need far less external praise to feel like their life has value. There's also a concept called hedonic adaptation that explains a lot of this behavior. This is the natural tendency for humans to return to their baseline mood shortly after any emotional spike, whether that spike is good or bad. Birthdays are designed to create temporary happiness, cake, gifts, attention, but for someone who has experienced this cycle dozens of times, the excitement fades fast. Picture someone in their late 30s who has had 30-plus birthdays already. They've learned through repetition that the joy of presents and parties usually fades by the next morning, while things like relationships, health, and personal growth stay meaningful no matter what day it is. So instead of chasing a one-day emotional high, they choose long-term consistency. This isn't pessimism, it's simply pattern recognition built from lived experience. Anxiety and control also play a role here. Birthdays come loaded with expectations. People might forget, plans might fall apart, Or the day might just feel underwhelming compared to what social media makes it look like. For someone who deals with anxiety or perfectionism, this unpredictability feels uncomfortable. Think of someone who plans a birthday dinner only to have half the guest list cancel last minute. That kind of letdown can sting more than people expect. So instead of risking that disappointment again, some people choose not to build the day up at all. By keeping expectations low, they remove the emotional risk entirely. This is similar to how some people avoid making big plans in general, not because they don't want good things to happen, but because anticipation itself creates pressure they would rather skip. Personality type matters here too, especially the difference between introverts and extroverts. A loud party filled with singing, attention, and social performance can feel exciting for an extrovert, but completely draining for someone who is more introverted. Imagine an introverted person being surprised with a big group celebration. Instead of feeling joy, their nervous system goes into mild overload from the noise and attention. For them, opting out of a big party isn't a rejection of their birthday, it's a form of self-protection. They might still care deeply about the day, just in a quieter way. Maybe a solo dinner, a long walk, or simply an evening alone with their thoughts. What ties all of this together is a simple but important idea. The way someone treats their birthday says less about how much they value themselves and more about how they have learned to handle attention, expectation, and emotional risk throughout their life. Some people downplay the day because they were taught early on that it didn't matter much to others. Some have simply outgrown the need for outside validation. And some are just protecting their peace by avoiding high-pressure social rituals that don't match their personality. None of these reasons make someone broken, cold, or ungrateful. In a culture that treats celebration as mandatory, choosing quiet is often mistaken for indifference, when in reality it might just be a sign of genuine self-awareness.